Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the JS Mindset Weekly Call. My name's Denny. Today is Saturday, May 29th, 2021. Joining me on the call today are Bill Holter, Jim Sinclair, and Dave. A few years back, one of my friends from Guatemala told me about a sinkhole that happened in the capital city of his country, and that was 11 years ago tomorrow. It was on Sunday, May 30th, 2010. An enormous hole that was 60 foot wide and 30 stories deep opened up in the middle of Guatemala City. It swallowed a 3-story building in a heartbeat. It swallowed a home, and there were local reports claiming that one man was killed when the building was swallowed up. My friend said there was no warning whatsoever when it happened. Suddenly, the earth just evaporated below the buildings, and that was that. My phone was really busy this week with people that I know asking me about the new highs in the stock market around 34,000. They were excited. They were really delighted and exuberant. I was reminded 20 years ago when I predicted that because of inflation that the Dow would soon be at 50,000 probably by 2025 and probably at 100,000 by 2030. I may end up being right, but not necessarily for the right reasons. My big fear right now is that a big financial sinkhole like the one in Guatemala is going to open up and suck everything into it, including the majority of the world's wealth. There are just so many warning signs, and yet nobody really cares about warning signs. But still, I have this nagging feeling that I feel in the ground beneath our feet. Before we get to the questions for Jim and Bill and Dave, please be aware that in our conversation today with the boys, it's important to remember we're not giving anybody investment advice. What we're trying to do is share our own personal perspectives of the economic world, and you can choose to add it to your own perspective. You can choose to ignore it, and in the end, we want you to be prepared for what might certainly be very trying times ahead. Bill, I'm going to start with you this week to get a gut check on gold and silver. Gold is hovering around 1900, silver around 28, but they don't seem energized just yet. However, I will say that it looks like pressure's building to take another swing at the precious metals cartel. But meanwhile, everybody is jumping on the stock market train. Bill, how about giving us some of your general Holter perspective?
Well, the reason they don't seem energized is because you're seeing naked shorts, you're seeing created contracts, created supply, whatever you want to call it, keeping the price down. What was it, a month ago or 2 months ago, the head of the CFTC, and I totally believe mistakenly, he was correct in what he said, but I can't believe that a CFTC chairman would say that, we were in trouble and we had to tamp the price of silver down. So, that's the head of the CFTC right there admitting to manipulation that they knew about, were involved about, whatever. Interestingly, yesterday, the U.S. Mint came out and said that they're, with the Silver Eagles, there's a Type 1 and a Type 2, and they're holding back on shipments. And in there was just one sentence or two sentences, but they outright admitted to a global shortage of silver. So what I'm telling you is the structure of the market is ready to blow. The demand is outstripping supply. Supply is certainly not keeping up. However, to this point, they've been able to, and I'll use Benham's words, they have been able to tamp the price down. And interestingly, I got an email, I think early today or late yesterday from JB saying it's not a supply-demand problem, it's a price shortage, if you will. Because when you underprice something, what you're doing is creating additional demand. And when you underprice something, you're also creating the conditions where supply is not going to be natural. Supply is not going to be 100% of what it could or would be. Supply will be less because the price isn't there to support the production. So it's a price problem, and they've created the problem on their own.
Bill, how do you think it's going to get resolved? Is it a Russia-China solution that they just come in and take over, or where do you think it's going?
Well, we obviously this month, or this coming month, June 28th, Basel III is supposed to take effect. If Basel III does take effect the way that it's written now, then you're going to see, you could literally see an entire financial system collapse because it'll go like dominoes. From what I'm reading, from what I'm hearing, people believe that this thing's going to go through. I'll believe it when I see it because, like I said, you're looking at, I mean, this is not just the gold market and not just the silver market. The problems will domino if you blow up players. Player A falls into player B falls into player C, and it goes all the way down the line. So is Basel III going to go through as it's written now? Your guess is as good as mine. If I had to bet, I'd flip a coin 100 times, and if it came out even, I would lean toward they're not going to do it the way they're saying they're going to do it. Because they have to be smart enough to know they're going to blow up the entire system. And when I say the entire system, I'm talking about banks, investment banks, etc., going down.
I can't believe they're going to do that, Bill. They got, these are their peeps, and that I don't see Basel III being enforced right now. Unless
they know for a fact that this thing's going to happen any day.
With or without them.
With or without them, and that way they'll do it. Go ahead, David.
I want to ask you a question, Bill. Bill, I've heard stories that like Endeavor Silver has actually withheld product from the market because they weren't happy with the price. And when you look at their stock, that company last June was trading for $2. It's a $7.50 stock as of Friday. And, again, they're a major silver producer. And, the silver producers are actually all like, First Majestic is strong, Fortuna Silver's strong, Hecla's strong. It does appear that silver is in super short supply.
Well, I think First Majestic is also, I know they had in the past, I don't know if they're still doing it, but I know First Majestic had withheld some of their production. They're selling only what they need to cover their expenses.
Well, why aren't gold producers doing that?
Because they're too stupid.
They don't understand that they're mining money. They
don't understand what they're mining.
Yeah.
Yeah, they think they're building widgets, and they don't realize that it's actually real. It's the only real money on the planet. Just to be a little bit superficial here, let's talk about real money. Jim, when I talked to you earlier in the week, I mentioned that Bitcoin. I'm sorry, I can't even say that with a straight face. I mentioned that Bitcoin sure looked iffy on the chart with a head and shoulders top. Now, that's the technical stuff, but more than that, a lot of folks who recently jumped in at the new highs absolutely got the crap kicked out of them pretty quickly, and they took some heavy losses, and many of those have already exited. Jim, you got any thoughts about what appears to be a big bubble here in Bitcoin?
Well, I think that the operative fact is that there is significant discussion about legislation or in investigation into the tax avoidance or tax evasion that Bitcoin has provided a platform for. And in addition to that, black money, excuse me, I have to be woke, don't I? Illegal money is making a very significant use of Bitcoin in being able to launder. For instance, if in fact that $5 million was paid as a ransom, and there's a lot about that story that doesn't smell right, but let's say it is true. How do you think it was paid? In cash in a bundle? No, it would be paid in Bitcoin. So at the same time, you're having some significant and serious proposals from the intelligentsia that part of the reset will involve a IMF or BIS or some major entity, central bank type cryptocurrency issue. Now, you can't have Bitcoin and those competing. And you can't have anything that influences a reset to be as wild as Bitcoin is. Therefore, you'd have to conclude that if the reset is in fact on its way, which it is, then Bitcoin is on its way out because they both can't exist at the same time. And that could be what's responsible for the Head and Shoulders formation. However, remember, everything is a rig. And if there ever was a rig of all times, it isn't the tulip craze or the South Sea bubble. It's cryptocurrencies. So I would be very careful in making any decisions based on technical analysis of something which is the biggest rig of the century.
Dave, I sent you a note about deficits, more deficits, and deficits all being piled higher and higher without a care in the world to what all the deficit spending is really doing to the solidity of our currency. The April numbers showed a 3.6% inflation, and that just seemed awful low compared to what I see at the store and the gas pump. Egg prices are up 18% over what they were a year ago. And our gas price, Dave, here in the Midwest is literally a full buck higher a gallon in just the last 4 months. Consumer spending is pulled way back from what I can see, but I'd like your thoughts, Dave. What are you seeing out east?
Well, Denny, I'm seeing exactly what I said several years ago. Jim said, we've all said, is they're going to print whatever amount of money they need to print to make this work. And when I say make it work, to make it appear that you're getting something for nothing. And if anybody hasn't experienced that in the last year and realized that, oh my God, we'll pay families, there's the story today, there's still a million checks to go out for $1,400. I mean, every time you turn around, it's like, yesterday, like Jim said, on Friday, at the end of the business day before a long weekend, in a no news cycle, what's the story? $6 trillion budget comes out. In it, there's every kind of fat pork deal you could imagine. We're going to build the tunnel under New York to New Jersey again. And every time money's given out, it goes to favored industries. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Boston Big Dig project.
Oh, Lord, yes.
It started off at around $1 billion price tag, and when it finally was done, it was $14 billion, and the damn ceiling and lights were falling off the thing and killing people in the tunnel. I remember when Interstate 84 was built through Pennsylvania when I was a kid. All these projects are pork barrels for the local politicians, the state politicians, the federal politicians to get their hands on a pile of money. That's the best part about printing tons of the stuff. All your friends are getting their share. Unfortunately, what the American public gets is flat-out inflation, which is what we've warned them about forever and ever and ever. And we could talk about the stock market at new highs because I have this argument with people all the time. And I'll just give you a quick factual story. Back in the day, I convinced friends of mine to purchase gold with their savings and stay out of the stock market. When I say back in the day, 20 years ago, the NASDAQ was at 5,000. It was in bubble territory, and every knucklehead in the world had to own whatever the latest fiber optic stock was, or Pets.com, or whatever it was. Gold was selling for $300 an ounce. Someone who bought 100 ounces of gold 20 years ago spent $30,000. Right now, that same amount of gold at $2,000 an ounce is worth roughly $200,000. The NASDAQ went from 5,000, it fell 75%. Over the next 20 years, they've managed to get the piece of junk back to 13,000, and it's primarily through a handful of tech stocks, heavy market manipulation by the plunge protection team and the Federal Reserve Bank, keeping the interest rates at sub-zero. And it's barely pulled off a double. So you tell me which was a better investment, 100 ounces of gold 20 years ago, or dump in $30,000 into the NASDAQ, which right now would be probably about $75,000. And you'd be risking holding that $75,000 in one of the most speculative bubble tops of all times. So at any moment, that $75,000 could evaporate by 75% yet again, using past history as future history. If you then took gold for the same scenario, if over the last 20 years, when the money printing was a fraction of what it is at present, then it would be a really safe assumption that Jim's prediction of $50,000 an ounce gold years back could probably become very low. Because as a really smart guy said, if nothing, I mean absolute nothing, it's not even air because you can't even breathe it. If nothing could trade to $60,000, what could the most valuable item on the planet trade for? And the only real money for 6,000 years of history trade for when the bubbles all let go. And that really smart guy's on the other end of the line, and I got to credit Jim Sinclair with that claim because, again, gold, when this is all said and done, is going to trade at numbers that people have no comprehension that could happen. Because all you got to look at is the money that's being printed and the fact that, Denny, to answer your question, China and Russia have accumulated all the gold. All the gold. When it all blows up, they're going to blame it because you always have to blame it on somebody because nobody ever blames themselves. I'm not overweight because I eat too much. I'm overweight because it's somebody else's fault or, whatever the problem is. It's like I see these diet books. The secret to weight loss. Wow. As somebody who's been a competitive weightlifter for over 40 years, it's pretty simple. Calories in and calories out. It's not rocket science. And printing money is the exact same thing. Paper dollars in, gold out. Look for gold to go much, much higher. This inflation stuff, gold's going to absolutely explode. Just my opinion.
Denny, let me add to that.
Isn't there strange things taking place? This I don't know how you pronounce it, Archegos or whatever it was that cornered a huge amount of various significant companies using artificial and superficial pieces of paper. And they did it. Must have made a lot of money over the year, but they were in a huge position at exactly the wrong time, and blue sky high. Gold is 1,906. Okay. MUX has come out of the penny stock area and traded unchanged on Friday to at $1.47. Now, what is MUX worth, or any of the other gold shares worth, in terms of the gold mineable in the ground? On a simple study of sensitivity to the gold price, something is awfully wrong. And we're living in an environment which is an environment of illegality, lack of ethics, lack of enforcement of law in every area. We let prisoners who have done hellacious things out of prison based on some social factor. We hear a man speaking to Congress who's got 5 RICO suits against the company that he runs, and nobody pays much attention to that, although RICO is based on organized crime. So I'm going to pose a question to you, and I'm also going to pose this to the listeners. There has been some outrageously large volume days in everything you own in the gold area. And everything has returned now to about where it started after having very significant price moves during a period of time when the stocks you own traded in 1 and 2 days the entire capitalization. But the management of the companies when asked the why and made inquiries with their transfer agents and as to the amount of changes that may have taken place, got an answer that they have seen absolutely nothing. So have you called your company and asked them to explain to you what that's all about? I certainly get a lot of calls, and I assure you that I'm trying very, very hard and with some degree of success in identifying what this is all about. But stakeholders is we have to be active managers. So pick up your phone, ask for the top executive, tell him you're a stockholder and demand he speak to you. He has the obligation to do so, and make sure that contact is completed with somebody other than their PR director. And tell them something smells like Limburger cheese. The item that you're producing is going up in value significantly, and you're going down in value significantly. Now, please explain that. Now, you have an obligation to yourself and to each other. Don't sit there idly watching something take place that might be another Argos, maybe on the short side. Get out there and find out what's going on and ask your company's management what they intend to do about it. You have that obligation as we have an obligation to you. You have an obligation to yourself. Exercise it. I'm sorry I got off on a tangent, guys, but I couldn't help myself.
Bill, there have been some really interesting shortages.
Hang on, Denny.
Yeah.
Hang on just 1 second. I just wanted to mention, Dave was talking about inflation. I've gotten a bunch of emails from people because Martin Armstrong is running around saying that the money supply has absolutely nothing to do with inflation. It's 100% confidence, blah, blah, blah. And all I can say is, if you get a dictionary that's 10 years, I mean, they've changed dictionaries now, but if you get a legacy dictionary 10 years old or older and look up inflation, look up deflation, and every definition will include the supply of money. The only thing I can say is to the people who have been emailing me, Martin Armstrong says this, Martin Armstrong says that. Well, as far as inflation is concerned, I believe he is 100% wrong when he says the money supply, the increased money supply is not inflationary. It all has to do with confidence. And I'll just add one more thing on Martin Armstrong, because I called him out on this back in, I think it was 2016. He wrote an article saying that in 1934, gold was devalued versus the dollar. And you could say, well, maybe that was a typo. Yeah, it could have been a typo, except he tried to explain and tried to rationalize how gold lost value versus the dollar, and that was to support his claims, his current claims at the time, that the dollar was going to outperform everything. And his proof for that was the fact, the non-fact, if you will, that gold was devalued versus the dollar in 1934, when in fact it was revalued higher 70% from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. It was the dollar that was devalued, not gold. I put that article out, and within 24 hours, he took his page down and rewrote it.
I heard the first version of that, and I'd like to thank you for cleaning that up in your language in such a professional way, Bill. It was really well done.
Yeah, guys, but don't let cold water be thrown on what I said.
No, sir.
No, because when I finished saying what Bill said is spectacular, complete, and right. But listeners, go back to what I said and think about it. It's more important to you than any argument over the definition of inflation or deflation. This is a rig, and
I agree.
Bill, let's talk about inflation, but more importantly, let's talk about some shortages. I sent you a list earlier of the things that are short right now, and they're really kind of unusual. Aluminum cans, snack foods, craft beer that is not regional. We're talking about national craft beer, niche sodas and carbonated drinks, which has a little bit to do with those aluminum cans, dried pasta, beans, macaroni and cheese, eggs, frozen vegetables, and cleaning supplies. Bill, that's an unusual list of shortages, and it's a broad brush of consumer goods. What do you think is going on there, Bill?
I think there are definitely some supply chain issues. We heard stories about meat packers that couldn't get employees to come in because of COVID. Now we're hearing stories of, like, for instance, McDonald's is giving new employees an iPhone if they stay for 6 months. These checks that people are getting that are more than what they can get if they work, why would somebody work? If somebody's going to give you a check to not work, and that check is more than what you would get if you do work, why would you work? So I think that's part of it. And I've said this probably 8-10 years now. The real problem with distribution, the real problem with the supply chain is going to be when credit breaks. When credit breaks down, you could kiss the supply chain goodbye, and basically for a time, whether it's 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months, 2 years, I don't know how long, but for a time, you're going to have whatever you have, and that's all you have. It's not like you're going to be able to go to a store and, pick up Kraft macaroni and cheese, because it's not going to be there.
Jim, we were talking this week, earlier weeks, there's monkey business going on, and it's straight up naked shorting. You pointed it out last week, and it was taking place in large trading organizations, and it was out of hand. It was in a total violation of market rules and regulations, but nobody seems to be holding anybody accountable. Jim, it continues, and it's an affront to not only the rule of law, but it smacks of a manipulation we haven't seen for many decades, not since the era of J.P. Morgan himself. Is there any hope that this is going to stop, Jim? You got any hope for it?
Yeah, I do. Number one is, alone you accomplish nothing, but an industry can accomplish something. And every company that is being injured by this, and all those stockholders who are screaming at management that they don't do this right or they didn't do that right, don't realize that there's a huge rig of an entire industry taking place, and they themselves must get their companies to look into it. They've got to act, and they have to act together. That's one hope. Let me give you another hope. Just the way our Argios, or whatever they call them, blew themselves up after making a lot of money by being artificially long enormous amounts of shares at a time when the market made a correction. Gold has inherent in itself, bullion, a desire for a new high. Now, and for very good reasons. I mean, when I was watching, of course, I happened to be watching Fox News when the announcement was made on Friday afternoon, and somebody inside their part of the Fox News crew lost control of themselves, and while it was being announced very seriously by the announcer, the size of the potential deficit and the size of the budget, somebody started laughing their brains out right up, and it came right over the program. What if gold is to rise very sharply here, and we have an operation of many little tentacles being run by, as all operations are, one extraordinarily intelligent operator? It goes bad. Do you really believe that you can bust the entire industry of gold producers while gold trades up to 3,000 right in front of their eyes? How do you know you won't see an explosion on the other side while when the fund went broke with the artificial paper positions, and that caused selling in the stocks on unprecedented sizes and falls? How do you know they won't kill themselves in their rig at just the wrong time in gold? I'll go for number two, more apt than number one, unless you listeners stop listening and call your companies and demand that they explain to you what volume doubled the amount of trading and the amount outstanding, and what is that all about, and why are you all back to prices that you were trading at before you traded your entire outstanding in a 2 or 3 day period? You have an obligation, company so-and-so, to tell us stockholders, what the hell is that all about?
Hey, Denny?
Go ahead, David.
I just wanted, again, I'd like to help listeners look up some things for themselves that, we're talking about, and this way they can have a little more clarity. One of the things that Jim's talking about is an article that was written by Pam and Russ Martinson. It was posted to their website May 27th, called "The Justice Department Opens Probe into Potential Bank Cartel That Financed Archegos," which is the hedge fund that Jim's referring to that blew up. I'll just read you a quick paragraph, and it'll give you a clue as to what they're talking about. But, what they're talking about here is the banks avoided Regulation T, which is margin requirements, and they created a derivative that essentially allowed Archegos to go long without anybody ever reporting the position taking place. And what Jim is saying is if that was used to the long side to manipulate stocks, to make them go up, to make artificial profits, then what says that that is not being used to the short side on stocks? So there's a lot of things that people could look up for themselves, and one of them is this article, and read it, Wall Street on Parade. It's a great website, incredible research work done there, and they catalog all their information. And again, what Jim was referring to is Jamie Dimon was interviewed, and again, Wall Street on Parade covered it. And while he's being interviewed, in key parts of the interview, when he was being asked questions, his microphone would mysteriously go into this screeching noise, and no one would hear what he was saying if he was saying anything. And then the microphone would come back on, and they would continue like it was the most amazing thing in the world. And what Jim is saying is there's a lot of things going on that the public should really get involved in looking at for themselves, and call their representatives, call regulators. This is actually going on. And so it's actually funny, because it is so funny, as Jim said, that people are reading the news and they're giggling in the background. You're reading that we're printing trillions of dollars, and you have people saying, oh, there's no repercussions for that. There's not? So then why did anybody ever work? So, common sense at this stage of the game doesn't appear to be too common, or people are not speaking out. And if people don't speak out and say, hey, this thing smells like, bad cheese from Denmark, then they'll just keep shoveling the cheese at you. So
activism they've got to take up, because that is the only answer to getting the right answer. Get on the telephone and speak to the top executive in the company you're invested in and ask them, what in the dickens was that all about? Your stock traded its entire outstanding in 2 days. It gained X percentage in value. Zip, flip, it went right back where it was, and the volume of trading, although it hasn't fallen back to the absolute lows, is pitiful compared to what made those stocks go up. What kind of derivative was written against that price appreciation that you have no idea about, and no Reg T has any involvement in it, no 13F is reporting it.
And if for listeners, Denny, just talk, again, I do a lot of research and, talk with Jim a lot, and I follow a ton of Gold Junior shares. Whether or not I have positions in them or not, I follow them. I check on them. I look to see what's happening. And if you look at junior shares, and I don't care whether it's, Alameda Mines, Gold Standard Ventures, Gold and Mineral Companies, Vista Gold, International Tower Hill, Alexo Resources, they're basically sleepy little mining companies with 70, 80, 100 million market caps. And they normally, over the years would do 100, 200,000 shares. Then mysteriously, like at the end of January, early February, every one of these things started trading 80 million shares, massive amounts of shares. And then the volume dried up again. And it's like, I just watch life for patterns. It's like you watch people walk out into the crosswalk. They don't pay attention. They get run over. I don't care what the light says. I'm going to look both ways before I cross the road. Well, that's just how I conduct my life. That's how I conduct business. I watch all gold posts, all signposts. And when I spot repetitious patterns, I pay attention to them. And, I'll talk and bring them to people's attention and say, have you noticed this? And they'll be like, oh, what do you mean have I noticed? I mean, how is this mathematically possible? And they'll say, I don't know. And then they'll look at it and say, well, it's not. And I'm like, well, what you're telling me is somebody just defied gravity or committed a crime or whatever you want to call it. We have the evidence, we're witnessing it, but nobody seems to stand up and say anything. So, again, I'm not pointing to any one thing in specific. I'm talking about patterns that I'm looking at because, again, I ask myself as well as these guys every week, how is it humanly possible that the HUI is trading at roughly a 50% discount to what it was at 10 years ago when gold and silver are in a more solid position than has ever been since I've been involved in the business, which is almost 30 years now. So that being said, there's patterns here. And, when people why is this happening? Well, have you ever called your congressman or have you ever called a regulator? Chris Marcus told us the other day. He has, and they just blow him off. Well, maybe if 1,000 people, or I know a person's case who got 6,500 people to write a letter to the SEC. Again, if we aren't active, then we're passive. And we sit around and we could talk about all we want about, well, this or that is happening. And people say, yeah, but the stock price of these companies still hasn't gone anywhere. Well, again, is there a reason for that? What is the reason? So it's, I try to teach people to ask questions and recognize patterns, and hopefully, we could provide all, rather than just yakking each week about this or that we think's happening, try and point out specific things that you yourself could latch on to, do literally an hour and a half of looking. Just look at the charts, look at the volume, look at all these juniors, and ask yourself, how is this possible? How is this pattern repeating itself over and over and over and over again in a month's time on the exact same type of stocks? Really, that can't mathematically happen. there's no probability for it. So, again, thoughts for the food, Denny. You can move on.
Well, I'm going to come right back to you, Dave. I heard this week that somebody should start a rumor of a shortage of jobs so everyone panics and goes out and gets one. Here in the Midwest, businesses and governments are calling workers back into the office. This is something we haven't seen in 15 months. And it looks like productivity has taken such a hit that everybody's starting to get desperate. The unemployment gravy trains have slowed down, and all of a sudden the nation appears to understand that people need to get back to work. Our state, where I live, has passed a law exempting businesses from lawsuits regarding COVID, and suddenly the whole business community is saying, hey, everybody, it's time to get back to work. David, is this just a natural progression, or is it panic? What's going on?
Well, there's a couple factors taking place all at once. And one of them is you had a certain group of people who had the ability to work from home. I can't believe how many white-collar people were able to work from home or say they were working from home and being productive, which has been my joke for the past years. How productive are you when I'm seeing you on the ski slope 5 days a week for 2 hours? You sneak. Everybody calls it sneaking out. And I'm like, hey, I'm the retired dude. How come all you people are out here now? Well, we're working from home. Well, we're hiding from COVID up here in the mountains. So, that group is going to return, it appears, to the office because I stay in touch with a lot of those folks. Your landscapers never left work. Your carpenters, your builders never left work. Primarily the people who left work were, your hotel restaurant people got devastated. So there were certain classes of people, that got devastated in the COVID, for lack of a better word, shutdowns. Because I don't call them COVID shutdowns. I call them government orchestrated shutdowns because, again, I'm still not sure of the validity of the decisions that were made to lock down a population of the world because it's never been done before. And if you believe their math, it still resulted in 400,000 cases a day in the middle of the winter, which seems, again, mathematically impossible that now there's no cases and we're down to 30,000. So a lot of that we're talking about, Denny, is what's reflecting in the so-called missing job numbers. It's that group of people who earn that $1,000, $800 a week range where the stay-at-home money meant that, no, I really wasn't going to go hustle up a job to make $500-600. If you take that money away, and a lot of that flowed into the retail Amazon sales crowd, because those are the people who are sitting home with free money on the internet. And again, I witnessed it with a lot of my friends' kids. They were getting unemployment when they never really had anything but a summer job to begin with. All you needed to do was apply, and there was money for you. And that's now what they're doing in these budgets that we talked about earlier, is they're passing out $6 trillion in infrastructure, or whatever they want to call it, green energy. That's like stay-at-home money for the corporations. The government's going to fund it. So that just brings us back to inflation. So the jobs thing will straighten itself out no matter how you cut it because we don't have manufacturing. It's not like the manufacturers are going to add 1 million, 2 million jobs. It's not going to happen. Hotel and restaurant people will go back to work, and the lower income people as the money dries up. But the white collar people pretty much had to work. They just now have to really go to work and work. Just my take.
Pretty good take.
Denny, one other thing that's coming up, who knows when, but I would guess shortly. Moratorium on foreclosures and evictions is at some point got to be lifted.
Bill, you need to repeat. You need to repeat that. You broke up.
Okay, I hear something in the background, like feedback or something. Anyway, what I was mentioning is moratorium on evictions and foreclosures at some point in time, and I think it's not in a distant future, I think it's in the near future, those are going to be lifted. And you're going to see people kicked out of their residences whether they're rented, whether they're owned. And then, of course, you're going to see foreclosures, bankruptcies, et cetera, because last year and until this point in time now, there's been a moratorium on bankruptcies, foreclosures, evictions, et cetera.
I heard that the eviction number, Billy, was in the neighborhood of 38% in some states like Maine. 10 to 20% is normal for the states, but Maine was the incredibly high number, and it was getting closer to 40%. So it is here, and it's supposed to be at the end of June or by August at the latest.
It's going to become as real as a heart attack pretty soon.
David, this week I saw that a Credit Suisse fund barred redemptions from investors who wanted out. Anytime you talk about liquidity issues in essentially a money market or a mutual fund or any sort of exchange-traded fund, that really will lock up a market. And it turns out that the investment contract for the fund stated very clearly that the fund could refuse redemptions if it was not in the best interest of the fund. Of course, nobody reads that crap, Dave. But how many financially transmitted diseases, we call them FTDs, like this one are out there just waiting to gobble up the profits, liquidity, and wealth like this Guatemalan sinkhole? I was stunned when I saw Credit Suisse barred the redemptions, Dave, just stunned.
Okay, Denny, I could answer that question by reverse engineering it. Anything where you don't hold the asset in your hand 100% has the ability to go down to the sinkhole. All contracts are renegotiable because possession is 9/10 of the law. So there's only two assets that I know of, gold and silver, that cannot happen to. As we have discussed throughout this whole show, it is the thesis of my life. Everything is rigged. Your job is to figure out how it's rigged and how it's going to affect your life if your analysis of the rig is correct. Once you identify the rig and analyze the risk that it presents to you or your family or your business, your job is to do the best you can at neutralizing your exposure to that rig. Anything that is a paper contract, I don't care whether it's an ETF, I don't care whether it's a stock certificate, I don't care what it is. If you can't hold it in your own hand at the end of the day or within a reasonable time frame of getting your hands on it where there is not an intermediary, you stand the chance of being a victim of a rig. Again, the one thing that I heard 20-something years ago, you can't eat it. What are you going to do with it? And I said, I don't know. But I do know one thing. It's mine. I earned it. I took my savings. I put it into what I thought I should put it into. And everybody gets to put their stuff into whatever they want. Everybody has to do their own analysis of what the rig is. As you see, Danny, they could rewrite any contract at any time that they want. They could suspend whatever law they want and call it a national emergency, a health emergency, make up the emergency. They could rewrite the rules. They could make capital gains retroactive. They could do whatever they want because
they've made capital gains retroactive in the proposal.
So I guess in the long run, Denny, I hope that answers the question from reverse engineering.
You did pretty good. Jim, this is the last question of the day. Of the four of us, you're the closest thing to a traditionally trained economist. The rest of us are dime store wannabes. For over a year, we've watched trillions and trillions of dollars poured into businesses and into citizens trying to promote spending and consumption to give an illusion that all is well and that we can artificially keep the finances going, illusory or whatever, and that none of us has to be repaid or ever dealt with. Jim, I keep thinking about that big sinkhole that my buddy in Guatemala tells me about. I just don't know how we can get out of it, Jim. Again, some perspective from you.
What you're looking at is management of perspective economics. If you can manage the feelings and emotions of the masses, the assumption is you can manage economies. And in that attempt, all of the tools of a Keynesian approach were utilized until there were no tools left, and they blew it up because interest rates went to zero. The first injection of huge money in the economy in 2009 was actually sterilized from having an economic effect because it went in to fill a black hole of realized losses in over-the-counter derivatives. So zero from zero was zero. What's happened and what you're talking about now has no sterilization factor whatsoever. The trillions being plowed in now will have an impact. And that impact is whoever can spend them on Amazon or anywhere else will do just that. And inflation via the injection of all of those funds, money supply, into the system is going to result at the most inopportune time of lighting up the inflation Roman candle and setting the stage for a systematic upset that could and will result in hyperinflation. So don't feel that what you've seen is contradictory. There was a sterilization of the funds injected in 2009. There is no sterilization factor in the funds being injected in the last administration and in this most outrageous proposed size of budgetary spending on some of the silliest things you've ever seen in your life when you go through it. It will happen. There's no question about it. And that takes me back to if the price of widgets goes through the moon, the manufacturers of widgets don't end up going into the cellar. There are strange things going on, and our listeners need to pick up their telephones or write their emails and get in touch with the companies they own and demand an answer to this, at least to get that company, if it hasn't, to try and find out what the answer is, because the truth is out there.
Jim, have you got anything else you want to share before we close out for the day?
Basically, my desire to see people drive me nuts if it is, because I run a company, or I am the executive chairman of the board, and I expected the calls to come in, and I think that they should do that with every investment they have, which is acting in a manner wholly illogical to reality. I want to see us not victims. I don't want to see us. I want to see us cause, not victim.
I think it's interesting when Dave read off all of those miners and all of them getting crushed equally with literally half of their market capitalization, or sometimes more than their market capitalization traded in a 48-hour period of time. There's something bad going on, Jim, and it smacks of manipulation, and the SEC and really the FTC needs to get involved, but I don't sense that there's a rule of law that anybody will take it seriously. Jim, I'm sorry to say that.
How about they screwed up? How about the price of widgets rising to new and unexpected highs creates new demand for widget manufacturers? And these guys blow up just like the Archipelago, or however you pronounce it, blew up.
Archego.
Archego. My bet is this rig has run itself dry, and now these guys have got themselves enormously on the wrong side.
Well, they're going to get their karma has a way of straightening things out, Jim. We'll see. David, how about you? Have you got anything else you want to share? You did some great research this week, buddy.
Well, and I just want to tag on to what Jim brought up, because, again, I try to show people ways to figure things out. And I want to jump back to Pam Martinson again, because her article, May 28th, this is recent, House hearings regarding Jamie Dimon. And I'll just read you one paragraph from it. So this is where things stand today. Two trial lawyers, Helen Davis Chapman and Lance Gudoff, have had the guts to write a book comparing the largest bank in the United States to the Gambino crime family and recommending that the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act, RICO, be used to charge the bank. Again, keep in mind that current and former precious metal traders charged with multi-year market manipulation, racketeering, conspiracy. This is from the Justice Department. So obviously this is going on. Obviously, it's public information. But if they think that you don't mind eating old Denmark cheese, you will continue to eat cheese. What Jim is trying to tell you is we as individuals, whether you have a position in gold shares and outside of owning gold itself, absolute leverage to gold is juniors. They are what is going to produce the future gold. So somebody is trying to wrap up all the junior shares and the majors while they shake out all the shareholders, and it would appear, based on what seems to be clear just looking at many or all of them and their trading patterns and volume patterns, that there's something to explain why the HUI is still half of what it was 10 years ago, when it should be 5 times of what it is years ago, based on the beginning of your story that everything from soybeans to wood has gone up in price hundreds of %. So be that as it may, that's how I'm going to wrap up what I've got to say. Do your own research and definitely follow up with your elected representatives and your local officials, no matter what country you're in, because this is affecting all of you, because you're talking about the reserve currency of the world, and this could end really badly.
Bill, you're the last one today. I had sent you a note that seems to me that we're in a political mess that, you know, they're not aware that the American people are really getting angry. They know their kids' schools have been co-opted by political animals instead of educators. They know that spending is sloppy, political, and haphazard. And, Bill, they're really getting pissed. I sent you that note, and I'll let you wrap it up from here. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agreed entirely with your note, except for the very end, where you say people are getting really pissed. People are irritated. I'll agree with that. But if you think this is pissed, wait until life in general, markets, etc., affect people personally. Then people are going to be pissed. I mean, I'm like grounded in logic. And what I hate worse than anything else is to be lied to. And all you have to do is turn your TV on, turn your computer on, listen to the radio. Everything's a lie now. I mean, literally, everything is made up. Everything's a lie. And people are going along with it. And when I say going along with it, you're not seeing mass riots. You're seeing made up riots. You're not seeing mass riots because it hasn't affected the average person. It's affecting very slowly. I was asked when will the masses understand gold and silver? And I simply answered, they'll understand gold and silver when the money that they're using currently doesn't spend. And whether it be an event, a currency event, a credit event, equity markets collapsing, whatever, once people are affected personally and individually, and they look at their statement and they're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to, I'm destroyed. How am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to put kids through school? How am I going to retire, et cetera, et cetera? That's when you're going to see people get pissed. And that's when you'll see real riots, not made up theater riots.
Well, folks, thanks for listening. That's it for us this week. Before we let you go, we remind you every time that money's not everything. It's just that having money makes things so much easier in life. Truly, it is the people in our lives that are worth $1 million, and you can't forget to tell them so. With that, here we are at the end of May, moving into June, and we will talk to you next week